Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Joining me now to discuss what I just reviewed for you is Colin Madine, Tech and Campus Editor at Breitbart News. Colin, thanks for joining me today.
Happy to be here, Kyle.
So, with the president's speech at Mount Rushmore last weekend, I think he really helped to sort of refocus America on what exactly is going on in schools, both higher ed, but also K-12. And so in the previous segment, I touched on this Breitbart News story on the Young America's Foundation survey. It was the Youth Patriotism Index, which got into a lot of, where kids land when it comes to American exceptionalism and feeling patriotic and all of those sorts of things. And what the survey found was that kids are, pretty patriotic, pretty pro-America when they are in high school. But then when they go to a university, those numbers drop significantly. What do you attribute that to?
Well, Kyle, there's been a steady change in higher education. So if you go back a certain number of years, more than a decade, we knew where the liberal crazies were. They were at schools like Oberlin in Ohio. They were in certain areas of the Ivy League. But, a lot of other schools were considered, quote unquote, normal, like college was when, the boomers were in school. But that has changed with incredible speed to the point where, even state schools, public universities, big giant colleges with sterling reputations are now just completely flooded with the social justice, the far, far left, the cutting edge of the progressive ideology, and they're just pounding it in the students' heads to the point where people are sending their kids to school and they come back essentially strangers because, all they know how to do is spout off the talking points that make AOC look conservative. And that's exactly what this survey shows. It shows that high school kids, nearly 75%, 70%, so 7 out of 10 high school kids think America is exceptional, think it's a great country. And that drops to less than 50% when you look at college kids, no matter where they go to school, because it's a relentless attack at every level of higher education.
So explain how that happens, because it's not like the government mandated that, higher ed has to teach certain ways. This just sort of happened. Explain how that happened.
Well, there's a lot of interesting talk. If you can find the rare professor that is either conservative or just not insanely hyper liberal, they'll kind of explain what happened. There was a professor who does videos on YouTube as the factual feminist. And what she explained was, especially in the social sciences, those that were not just pure ideologues focused on doing work and teaching, and the crazy SJW ideologues focused purely on getting tenure, because once they had tenure, they have power. So over time, what college has evolved where the crazies now teach the crazies who teach the crazies. It's like a sort of a vicious cycle where the most progressive people become the tenured professors and in turn teach the most progressive students, and they force other people out. So now we're at the point where not only are they sort of transforming the kids, but within the college ecosystem, if you're remotely conservative, or if you're not even political, but you say something or do research that the far left doesn't like, they will force you out. So, I know you're very experienced with this. We see all day long, how they hide behind the shield of tenure and academic freedom, and we have to have the freedom to say and research, interesting and factual information. Well, in your home state of Michigan, recently, Michigan State forced out Stephen Shu as VP of research, a Chinese guy. He's still a professor, but his grave sin was funding and supporting an academic study that showed that there's no racial bias in police shootings. So they got him fired, so they have the power. You want to know how it evolved? They got the power, and they made sure no one except their club got the power.
See, and that case is very interesting, because you would think the university would want as much research and as much investigation to get to the truth and report the truth on, for the benefit of society. But there's certain types of truth that they don't want people to know. And so then in this example that you just cited, they will actually punish someone, demonize someone who does attempt to get to the truth. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, parents, taxpayers don't realize, is that this has been the long march through the institutions. And the Bill Ayers of the world, and I use his name specifically because he was a teacher of teachers. He knew exactly what he was doing. And they go into the universities, and their goal is to teach teachers radicalism through the colleges of education. And so when we see these sorts of attitudes, not just in higher ed, but in K-12, that's where it's coming from. So is there really anything that can be done about it?
Well, look, I'm a big proponent of the only way that you can fight universities right now is with money. And in some cases, we've already seen that schools like Evergreen State College out on the West Coast, which became just an absolute hotbed of insane leftism, and even colleges like Mizzou have been hurt bad by alumni stopping giving money. But, our federal government, including the Trump administration, just pumps gazillions of dollars into these schools, which enables them to do, every crazy left-wing indoctrination program they can think of. So the only way that you can hurt these guys is with money. And I don't see any other real way beyond like a total reform of the higher education system to change that.
The left loves to never let a crisis go to waste, right? And so it seems to me that with coronavirus shutting down campuses, going to online, all of that, it seems to me like that's an opportunity for people to really sort of rethink the whole system. So, for example, Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, said this week that she thinks that kids who are going to Harvard and are being charged $50,000 for online classes shouldn't be taking that. And so are you hearing in your reporting and in your writers that are reporting about this, is there a movement to sort of rethink the way higher ed and K-12 is done? Or is it just sort of, people just keep going along and paying their taxes and paying their tuition and not complaining about it?
Well, I mean, there's definitely complaints about it, but, I will give you two answers. One from what we've reported and one is my experience as a parent is, in general, online education is a disaster. We've reported at the college level that online classes have just made massive group cheating far easier than it ever was in the classroom. And, we're seeing a lot of kids push back at up to 77% of college students said online learning was, worse than normal classes and not sufficient. And you're seeing a large movement of kids who are considering taking a gap year, which is common in Europe. It's not common in America, where you just take a year off from college or before college, because what that's telling you is online classes are just not cutting it. And to your point, they're not getting their money's worth. I'd argue in many cases, students don't care about their money's worth because it's either their parents' money or it's the government money that they're going to be paying back for 40 years through student loans. On the flip side, all the teachers care about is that online classes make it easier for conservatives and conservative media to find out the wacky, crazy stuff they're teaching in class.
Right.
Because it can be recorded. So we know where they don't care about the cheating. They don't care about the students not learning. They only care about their bias showing. I haven't seen any sort of real organized pushback. There are a lot of Harvard kids complaining that they're not giving any tuition breaks, but ultimately they still want to be a Harvard student and they want to be a Harvard grad because it gets them into the right clubs and into the right jobs.
Well, and I'm sort of puzzled why there isn't more of a movement, sort of an outrage movement, if you will, at the K-12 level. Here in Michigan, I'm a parent of 3 kids, all in schools, and there's a very real possibility that there will not be in-person learning in the fall. And the governor has, sort of waffled on this, and she said, well, maybe there'll be, kids will go 2 or 3 days, and then the other days will be online. Now there's very real possibility that it will be 0 days in person. And I'm saying to myself, well, where are the virtual learning people, the people who, excel at teaching kids online? Why are we not looking at them? And on top of that, why are we not, if we're not having to, pay teachers, which I know they're still being paid, but if we're not having to pay teachers, if we're not having to have buildings open and all of that sort of thing. Colin Madine, Tech and Campus Editor at Breitbart News, thanks for joining me today.
Have a great day, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson 4, KYLEOLSON 4. I'm also on Parler, Kyle Olson 4. This is The Kyle Olson Show.